Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, June 12th, 2023. Let me start by apologizing. I did not get a video posted last week, and it was entirely because I was just having so much fun that I didn't get around to filming and then getting it posted. I was up in West Virginia at Snowshoe Mountain Bike Park, and it was absolutely incredible, doing some really gnarly downhill riding with one of my good friends. We only ended up in the hospital one time, had to get his face glued up after a pretty bad crash, but he was fine. We got back on the trails and had an amazing 4 days up there in West Virginia. Rode some trails that I could never have believed I would find a way to navigate, but I was emboldened in my confidence with some pretty awesome body armor that I rented and also a downhill mountain bike that was just stunning, and it made big obstacles feel really quite small. But all that to say, it's important that we play sometimes. And so let me encourage you. I'm almost 46. Whatever age you are, find ways to play, to get out there and do the things that purely bring you joy. That's what I did last week. And so I missed a week of the videos. I apologize. We're back at it today. And so hopefully we'll be able to keep these coming once a week. Today, what I want to talk about is the importance of cognitive awareness and reasons that sometimes we fail to pay attention in the ways that we should. Living life as a philosopher, again, I don't mean professional philosopher with a PhD and teaching classes on Plato and Descartes. I mean living a life reflectively. So I want to suggest that there are three ways in particular that this kind of cognitive awareness can become developed, and places in our everyday lives that we might want to put a little bit more time and attention into reflecting upon so that we can get better at moving forward on purpose. The first thing, cognitive awareness sometimes gets limited purely out of ignorance. It's important that we realize, that we be humble enough to realize that we don't know everything. Socrates famously said that he was the wisest only because he was aware of his own ignorance. But when we are aware of our ignorance, that should then impact the way that we live. We shouldn't strike out thinking that we've got it all handled. When we were up there at Snowshoe, these trails were way bigger than anything my friend and I had ever ridden, and there were many times where we had to stop and get off, walk a section in order to think best about, all right, let's learn the way this trail works so we can go back and then be able to ride it appropriately with some knowledge. Other times, we looked at a section of trail and just thought, nope, this is not something that we're able to ride. Knowing that we were ignorant about how to ride it well actually allowed us to live on purpose in important ways. The idea of knowing what you don't know so that you are then able to be cognitively aware of the fact that you need to take things slower, approach things with questions, be open to those who might know more. That awareness is something that all of us encounter all the time. So, first, ignorance is a big obstacle. The only way that we can navigate it successfully is if we are aware that it exists. Humility is required. The second thing that can be an obstacle to our cognitive awareness, our ability to live on purpose and do so successfully in the world, is ironically familiarity. So when we become too familiar with things, we tend to take them for granted. They become sort of the background noise of whatever we are listening to. It just fades and recedes into the sort of surrounding space rather than being the object of our intentional consciousness. Now, a good example of this is spent a week at Snowshoe, riding gnarly trails, unbelievable stuff, all black diamonds. And then I came back to my town and rode the little Swamp Rabbit Trail here, which is paved and flat. It's where I ride with my 80-year-old father a couple times a week. And having just gotten off those big gnarly trails, I decided to try to make this little swamp rabbit a little bit more fun and tried to make a jump where there really isn't meant to be one. But because I'm so familiar with this trail, it was no big deal. I landed wrong, gashed the heck out of my lower leg. So it turns out I got hurt worse the day I got back from the big trails riding on the ridiculously easy paved flat stuff because I took it for granted. I wasn't continuing to be aware of risks and the realities that were involved in being smart about my embodied location. Now, my buddy and I, when we were up in Snowshoe, actually talked about this a lot, that all of our worst injuries have happened on the local trails, the easy ones we ride all the time. And it's because we just take for granted what we should be taking seriously. We're failing to be philosophical in those moments. This is something actually that Aristotle speaks about when he talks about the importance of developing practical wisdom or phronesis. And this practical wisdom is an awareness that allows us to navigate the world in habitually virtuous ways. We should develop the habit of virtue, but it can become something insidious when those habits slide into just a kind of taken for grantedness of what is normal. One of the weirdly good upshots of the trauma that was the COVID pandemic is it invited us to rethink normal. And in doing so, what was so familiar now can become something that we do on purpose or we revise in light of new possibilities. So, A, we should watch out for those moments of ignorance that creep up on us. We should develop humility in response. 2, we should do our best to be aware of the temptation for the familiar to slide to normal in ways that then shut down our reflective capacities, our reflective engagement with what's in front of us. And 3, I want to suggest that the other big obstacle for a reflective, purposive, cognitively aware life is when we become hermeneutically insular. Now, that's a fancy way of simply saying we close off our exposure to difference, to new views, to different perspectives. This is something that happens in the way that we sometimes talk about silos of information or echo chambers. We only talk with, engage with, hang out with those people and those views that we already find sympathetic to our own. Now, this is perfectly reasonable because who doesn't want to feel like what they think is a good idea and what they believe is true? But again, that can blind us to the very ignorance that remains. It can create temptations to normalcy and familiarity in spaces where we might want to rethink how we go forward. So finding a way to cultivate hospitality in relationship to difference, alternative ways of seeing the world, other ways of navigating what we otherwise would miss. This is something that can be crucial to developing the right cognitive awareness as we move forward in life reflectively. So those 3 suggestions are suggestions for you today. Let's try to avoid ignorance by becoming aware of it, developing humility. Let's try to make sure that what we take for granted, what is so familiar, doesn't become something that then is just a backdrop for our own idiocy. And instead, we cultivate an awareness and a reflection that lets us put question marks there and continue to dig into it. And third, when we are tempted by just surrounding ourselves with people who already agree and affirm our views, our beliefs, and our way of living, that we become hospitable to difference in order to rethink where we are so that we might go forward maybe to better places, or at least go forward on purpose, remaining where we find ourselves. Either way, it's valuable for us to become philosophical today rather than thinking philosophy is something that gets developed in the college classroom. Philosophy happens where we are when we live on purpose and live toward what we take to be a flourishing, faithful life. I'll see you next time, unless a piano falls on our heads.